Well, the ATF is already working on its next ban, and this time they want to make us all felons. And today I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm talking about because history is proving once again that the ATF cannot be trusted no matter whose administration they are under. Today we're going to look at some of that history and how we are being set up just like we have in the past to face another ban in the future. But I say they're actually not going to push this overnight. They may not even push it next month or next year. Think Project Fast and Furious, but instead of trying to catch the cartel, or at least that's supposedly what they were doing, this time they're trying to use this against gun owners. And unfortunately, by the time they put this motion in place, I think it's already in place to be honest with you, but by the time these things are enacted, you are going to have tens and tens of millions, almost all gun owners at some point own the thing they're planning on banning. I'll give you my opinion. I want to hear yours, whatever it might be. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Let me just say, the items that we're talking about and the guns we're talking about, I support 100%. And I'm not trying to scare anybody from buying these things. As a matter of fact, if you want them, you should get them. Just understand in the future, the ATF is going to use these things against you. And so that's why you being aligned with good pro-gun control groups is going to be even more vital in the future. Buy them. I support them 1,000%. Just know you'll be targeted because of them. Now, if you think the ATF's tactics are like some kind of new phenomenon, you would be sadly mistaken. Going all the way back to the 70s and 80s from original AR pistols and dealers kind of asking, or manufacturers asking the ATF, how should these things be classified? And originally getting clear classification, no problem, and then a letter flip, essentially, right? Where they write a letter or they write up a ruling and they say, you know what, actually those things are SBRs. An even more and well-documented case is auto sears. Back in the 70s and 80s, these things, for the AR platform specifically, used to be just parts that you dropped in. There was really no problem with it. And then ATF ruling, I think it's 81-4, came along and said, you know what, after a bunch of people already had these parts, then they say, yeah, you can't do that. These are actually full autos now. So anything labeled as AR-15, drop-in sear, or auto sears, or anything like that, instantly became full autos in the eyes of the government. Probably starting to sound pretty familiar, but unfortunately there's even more historical data to go off of on the ATF. Under Bush Sr., the ATF back then used the sporting rifle language in order to ban a lot of AKs, HK variants, FALs, and those types of rifles because they didn't meet these sporting rifle purpose categorization and the way ATF wanted to categorize this so-called sporting rifle thing, which is, I thought was actually a fairly new phenomenon, but it's really not. And this whole sporting rifle thing is pretty silly anyways. It's kind of a way for manufacturers to bend to the will of some of these ATF rulings and gun control groups, and I just don't like it, right? Language means a lot, especially in firearms and legislation and all that kind of stuff. And call the rifles what they are. I'm sure I've used modern sporting rifles in the past too. Now I just refuse to do it, right? They're rifles. They're AR-15s. That's what they are. But they actually use that language to ban these guns. So then manufacturers said, okay, well, we'll take the launcher lugs off, the bayonet lugs, folding stocks. We will neuter these rifles down to nothing. Well, the ATF still said, still doesn't meet that classification. So essentially all of these guns were essentially banned from import at that point. They did the same thing with street sweeper type of shotguns back then too. Striker 12s, the USAS 12, right? These guns were sold for years. And it wasn't some congressional ruling or some new congressional law that was signed in. It again fell under sporting purposes. So the NFA is like, or the ATF is like, hey, we got away with the whole sporting rifle ban essentially under Bush Sr., so why can't we do it with these guns? And they were like, oh, they're big bores, and the fact they don't fall within their sporting category means that they're actually now destructive devices under the NFA. They wrote up a new rule and essentially banned them overnight after selling them for years. They've even went as far as banning shoelaces. I think this was in 2007. and they found that a 14-inch shoelace could be considered a full auto device because it can be attached to a standard semi-auto rifle in a way that can make it into a full auto. Now, eventually they ended up recanting this ruling and this letter, but still, that just shows you how far they're willing to go in order to reclassify certain items into full autos. But here's something you may not know. There was actually an earlier adoption of the bump stock called the Atkins accelerator. It was approved in 2002 because the ATF, using some sort of logic anyways, said that, hey, you attach this, it's still one pull of the trigger equals one action, one round comes out. Okay, the Atkins accelerator was sold, produced, all of that good stuff. Well, in 2006, they revisited the Atkins accelerator and said, yep, nope, sorry, under the NFA, that is a full auto as well. And here's one of the best modern examples and what I think will lead to a lot of gun owners having issues in the future, but also will show the fight and resilience that gun owners and good gun companies alike have in themselves to fight back against this tyranny. And that is the FRT from Rare Breed. This goes back to 2020. They filed like 223 patents. They get approval. They say, all right, we buy those patents, and they plan to release in December of 2020. Well, guess what happens in July of 2021 under the Biden administration? They say, yeah, no, those are actually full autos. So after approval and saying, hey, oh yeah, that's one trigger pull, one round, totally acceptable. They sell them for a little bit, 6 months. I don't even know. Tens of thousands of people buy them, and stores are carrying them. Everything is good until the ATF just decides that this is now a full auto. Again, they just bypass Congress and they just wake up one day and say, hey, remember those FRTs we reviewed all those patents for? Yeah, let's ban those things, dude. What is that? Does that sound good? Yeah, sure. And they like to use this, oh, it's not a firearm, so it's not protected. Well, a firearm part that is necessary to the function of a firearm, in my opinion, should be protected. I say you write a freaking constitutional amendment to protect every single part, piece, add-on, accessory, etc. for all firearms, magazines that go along with them, and the ammo. Somebody needs to do that. But essentially what they do is they wait on a product to gain traction, to get popular, and then they revisit it. So guess what Rare Breed did? They didn't just roll over and say, you know what, we had a good run, boys, and that's it. Now this is after the ATF actually raided Rare Breed manufacturing. The ATF tried to do everything in their power to keep them from manufacturing this part. Rare Breed teamed up with the National Association for Gun Rights, and they ended up winning their lawsuits against the ATF and the Department of Justice. And guess what? All of those seized FRTs, yeah, the Trump's DOJ essentially said, hey, we're actually going to be sending these seized items back to their rightful owners. That doesn't always happen. And I don't know that you could expect that with a future administration that hates the sight of things just like this. But Rare Breed showed that with the time and the money and the resilience, you can stand up to these government agencies. And guess what? These things are back out there, rightfully so. I couldn't think of a better company to have a sponsored segment with. And big thanks to Rare Breed for sponsoring today's video. I can't wait to drop this thing in and try it because of the functionality that it offers shooters. Not only are they made in the United States, but 7075 T6 aluminum, 4140 heat-treated steel, and they offer 3 very important positions. Obviously, you have semi, you have safe, and then you have the forced reset capability. And besides providing a more accurate and better trigger than what you'll find in standard ARs and mil-spec lowers, which is what these will all drop into, but it also provides that force reset functionality. So essentially, after each shot, it forces the reset, but it will lock the trigger just until the bolt carrier group returns back to battery so everything is safe to fire. So what this offers is essentially 2-position, it's actually a 3-position, but 2-position functionality for shooters, right? If you want complete accuracy, you still have semi-auto. If you want to do training drills, competition shoot, things like that, force reset, part of it actually gives you all of that functionality. I can't wait to drop this one in one of my ARs and actually try it for myself. But one thing I can tell you is that these guys have been a phenomenal force in fighting for our rights to own these things. And it's not just an FRT, but it's also fighting for the right for gun owners to be able to stand up to companies like this when normal people really wouldn't have the funds, time, or anything to do that. So having a good grassroots organization plus a company that is not willing to roll over, in my book, I will always support companies like that. So again, big thanks to Rare Breed for sponsoring today's video. And this device specifically will be used in the future to try to jam up gun owners once again. We've seen it with bump stocks. We've seen it with pistol braces. But you'll notice a pattern with all this stuff. It eventually gets overturned. And this is how I think they approach bans in the future. Doing straight up bans, I don't know that they'll do that, especially with Bruin. There's no historical context of banning certain parts and stuff like I've talked about in videos before. Gun owners have been doing that since our freaking country was started. So I think courts will continue to shoot this stuff down. The sleeper agent, if you will, at the ATF that is a little more creative in their design in coming up with bans will essentially try one of two methods. Constructive intent. You have an AR build with a pistol brace, an FRT, whatever it may be. Police come into your home, you get arrested for something completely separate, and they say, hey, you actually are now in possession of an unregistered machine gun, SBR, something like that, because they say that you had intention of making an unregistered NFA item. And they've used this same logic to hem up gun owners in the past with auto sears, lightning links, conversion parts. They know it's a big enough loophole that they could actually squeeze a lot of gun owners into that category. But the other way they can do this, and probably the most likely way, they do the incremental squeeze. So it's not just some kind of outright ban on parts or guns or FRTs or anything else, but it's redefinition, letter or letters, pressure put on manufacturers or dealers, voluntary turn-ins, or they use some kind of media mass tragic type of event where one of these devices is used in a gun and then they push that for new rulemaking in the future. It's absolutely going to happen, but the way they do it, I think, and maybe you guys have some better ideas than I do about how the ATF will approach their upcoming bans. But make no mistake about it, they are going to do this. It's just a matter of when and where. That's my opinion, man. That's kind of what gun owners, I think, are facing in the future. But again, that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear yours. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.